This meetup was actually originally intended for me to get practice for this training that we're doing later on. So apologies if this meetup is terrible. This talk is terrible. But we're also trying to experiment with making things a little bit more interesting. So this is the first time I'm doing this. So I'm trying to do like a board game type thing. You've played Taboo, right? Where you're trying to guess a word, but you're trying not to say specific words. So this is what I'm going to call Tech Talk Taboo. But I don't have a word that I'm trying to guess. These are words that I'm trying to avoid during the talk. They're common buzzwords related to either AWS or security. Oh, okay. The words here are governance, undifferentiated heavy lifting, mitigate, least privilege, and orchestration. So originally I was going to take a drink every time I say one of these words, but I actually can't see them, so I'm going to have you in the audience take a drink if you have a drink. To signal to me that I'm...
How are you getting home?
If you want to participate, you can do that.
We can just let you know when you need to drink if you say it.
Get the air horn.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can do that. You can just you just point to me or something. Okay, well, I should probably get started because I have 60 slides to get through in the next half an hour. But have you noticed that over time? Well, we noticed that the more we use AWS, the more AWS accounts that we have. When you have AWS accounts, they tend to sprawl, right? You start a new account for a new client project, and then when you go to production, it's well, I need to separate their dev and their prod. And so now you have another AWS account for their production and for the dev. And then you might get a new developer, and then you're going to spin up a new account for that developer. You might have product or a business unit, and then you want to spin up a new AWS account for that. So so you end up with a dozen AWS accounts in no time. And then I've also noticed that the more AWS accounts that we have, the more janky our account management becomes. So it's easy if you have a single AWS account to stay on top of things. But if you have 12 different accounts, and then now I have an IAM user in each account, but they're not all the same username, and then all of my access keys are in blood red because I haven't rotated them in the past 3 years. Or billing, I have to look in all these different places to keep tabs on the billing, but it's too much of a hassle to do that, so I just don't look at the billing at all. And then I have all these EBS snapshots that are burning a hole in the corporate credit card. So, so in recent years, AWS has released a couple services that help you manage multi-account, right? So these might not be services that most developers use on a day-to-day basis. We're used to Lambda, DynamoDB, and stuff like that. But these account management services are AWS organizations. That'll give you consolidated billing. AWS Single-Sign On, which actually I never heard of until I started preparing for this talk. Which SSO is pretty cool. And then actually around this time last year, AWS came out with not a service, but a solution. Have you ever seen those AWS solutions? There's the AWS scheduler solution. Anyway, so AWS came out with a solution, which is a CloudFormation template. It's not a service. You spin it up in your AWS account, and you basically have to manage it yourself. But they have the CloudFormation template. This solution was called Landing Zone, and it helps you orchestrate all of your AWS accounts. So you don't have to learn all these services to manage your accounts. So fast forward to 2 months ago, there was a conference in Boston called Reinforce, which is like reInvent, but it's with a security focus. So at Reinforce, 2 months ago, they released AWS Control Tower, which is basically the same thing, almost the same thing as Landing Zone. But instead of it being a solution, it's a managed service. So welcome to Intro to AWS Control Tower. My name is Robert Chen, and you might know me as the guy that usually opens the door downstairs. And let's get started. Okay, so AWS Control Tower is a service that helps you manage multiple AWS accounts in terms of governance, security, and account setup. So before I talk too much about it, let's take a look at what it looks like. So I'm not actually doing the demo because I don't trust myself to do demos, to do live demos. So I have this pre-recorded on a video. So here, like if you look at the top, there's a special URL, which is like the SSO URL. And then instead of the IAM page that you're probably used to signing into, this is a different single sign-on page. And then here I'm just logging in with my username and password. And then you might be used to MFA, Google Authenticator, but here the SSO MFA is not going to be Google Authenticator. It'll just send you an email with the code. Here I'm typing it in. So let me pause it real quick. So this orange box represents all of your AWS accounts. So each one of these, I have 4 AWS accounts here. And then if you expand an account, it'll show you the different roles that you can assume. And here I'm assuming an admin role that has SCOSH access. And then, just to show you what the Control Tower dashboard looks like. It really doesn't show you much. It just shows you like a bunch of big numbers, how many accounts I have, the account names, and the root email account. But by the way, don't look at that. And then there's like guardrails that I have enabled for this account. And I'll get into what guardrails and all that stuff is later on. Oh gosh.
I think he's doing it on purpose.
I didn't even realize that I said that word. Okay, so why would you have multiple AWS accounts? I sort of touched on this before. A big reason is to control the blast radius. Like having a different AWS account is like the only true way to separate 2 environments. Like if you have 2 client projects, you could try to put them in different regions or do IAM permissions. Like the only safe way is to just give them completely different AWS accounts. And then if you have developers, you could either restrict their IAM permissions so that they're operating in like essentially a straitjacket, and then when they want to try a new service, then they're going to Slack you and be like, hey, I can't spin up this CloudFormation template, and then send me the error message, and then you give them the permissions, which I do with Chris.
A lot.
A better way would be to just relax their developer permissions and just give them their own AWS account that's never going to touch production. But if you're going to have multiple AWS accounts, there's a downside to it. So every time you spin up a new AWS account, you have to maintain it for the rest of your life, almost like owning a dog. And then if you're in an enterprise environment, you might be managing like hundreds of accounts. And it's really, it becomes a real problem at that point because, even at the basic level, you have these security hygiene checklists where you have to rotate your passwords, rotate your keys, tailor your IAM policies to least privilege. lock down your security groups.
You gonna make it?
Call your sponsor.
Also, if you have different AWS accounts, project requirements are going to drive the security requirements, right? This account might be financial related, so they're going to have a ton of security. Another one might be your CI/CD for your product, and that has like no security on it. So these different accounts become silos, and if you're ever going to manage these accounts, you sort of need to standardize, and it's really hard to get everyone on the same page. So this is where AWS Control Tower comes in. It helps you more easily manage multi-account, and it gets you off to a good start in terms of security. So centralized management. So when you have all these AWS accounts, they're sort of like spread apart in terms of like where they are security-wise, and all the management is all spread apart. So one of the services that I mentioned earlier, AWS Organizations, Control Tower leverages this. So, well, first of all, it consolidates your billing, which is a big help. It also puts your accounts in sort of like a hierarchy. You could throw them in an OU, and you could staple policies on the OUs. Service control policies. I'll get into service control policies a little bit later on. Another service that Control Tower uses is Single-Sign On, where you could drop in unannounced on any AWS account. Sort of like, break the glass. I need to break into this account, and then mitigate something. Do I have mitigate down there?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. And then it also uses Service Catalog, which I never use, but it's actually kind of nice. So you could actually spin up a new AWS account as if you were spinning up like an EC2 instance. So, so besides making your life easier, Control Tower also gives you baseline security. So this security gives you visibility and control. Visibility in terms of logging. So it'll pre-configure these common logging services, and it will centralize them to a central AWS log account, which is sort of like a best practice anyway. And it also uses service control policies, guardrails, to enforce security across accounts. So I'll get to that later. So I'm going to take a little tangent for CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Config. So I sort of made up this term. I call these three like the mirepoix of security. Mirepoix is like the carrots, celery, onion for soup. Anyway. So to explain like CloudWatch and CloudTrail for those who haven't used them, you have a whole bunch of different AWS logging services up here, represented by like pancakes. And then you have CloudWatch, which is your log ingestion service, right? And then there are a number of services that integrate with CloudWatch. One of them is CloudTrail. So CloudTrail, it will log your AWS API calls. By the way, you should always enable CloudTrail in all regions. VPC flow logs, which records metadata about your network traffic. It doesn't record the actual network traffic, just the metadata about it. And DNS query logs. So, by the way, there's another service in addition to Control Tower that was recently, it's not that recent, I guess. GuardDuty, right? GuardDuty. So GuardDuty is like a machine learning. It will automatically listen in on your CloudTrail, VPC logs, and DNS logs. You actually don't need to enable these in your account. It has like a separate stream that it listens to. And it just listens to these, and then it will act as like an IDS, intrusion detection system, to see if there's like malicious behavior happening in your account. So GuardDuty is a good thing to enable in all regions, in all accounts as well. Oh yeah, another thing that's integrated with CloudWatch is EC2 agent logs. So if you have a Linux box, you might want to push your varlog secure up to CloudWatch, so you can see if someone's trying to brute force your SSH. So anyway, that's CloudWatch, CloudTrail, config. So now I'm going to talk about the landing zone. So Control Tower is based off of that landing zone product. And so it uses the same pattern of a landing zone. So what is a landing zone? You start off with, like, say, a fresh AWS account. And then you go into Control Tower and you say, create a new landing zone. I want to use Control Tower. What it does is it converts your AWS account into like a master account or landing zone. It'll also create these two other accounts, which I'll talk about more later. And then it'll enable AWS organizations, which will create two OUs, a core OU, which will envelop these two accounts that it created, and then a custom OU where you would plop your new AWS accounts into. And then say if you want to spin up AWS accounts that you'll actually use, you go into Service Catalog, and then it has a product called Account Factory. You go into Account Factory and you spin up new AWS accounts as if you're spinning up EC2 instances. It's pretty easy. The nice thing about using Service Catalog's Account Factory to spin up these accounts is that it will automatically enable CloudTrail in all regions. And these CloudTrails will stream all their logs to a centralized location, which is kind of nice. This is something that, even if you don't use Control Tower, this is something you should ideally do in your multi-account environments. So this right here, where you're streaming CloudTrail to a centralized location, it's kind of oversimplified, so I'm going to blow this up a little bit. So you have your dev account, your log archive account. So what Control Tower is doing, so this diagram you're not going to see anywhere on the internet because I made it up from me trying to reverse engineer what they're trying to do. So it might not actually be accurate. But this is what I think it's doing. So CloudTrail, it's integrating it with CloudWatch, which is pretty easy to do in the GUI. In addition to enabling CloudTrail, it's also enabling AWS Config in all regions. And the AWS Config artifacts or objects are being saved in that same centralized S3 location, which is good. And then, so there's this other account that I haven't mentioned called the audit account. So this is basically your security team's playground. This is where they log in. And so CloudTrail and Config, they'll send their data to S3 in batches. And so whenever a batch of cookies is done, it'll ding and say, hey, security team, you got mail. You got your next batch of data. So this will be hit like periodically, maybe every 15 minutes or so. And then the security team, they don't actually log into this log archive. Like, no one logs into this log archive because, I guess for forensic reasons, you don't want like anyone in here changing anything. So security team would log into here, but they would have cross-account read access to this, to these S3 buckets. And then, so for AWS Config, it actually has two sides to the service. One is the config recorder. So AWS Config records the state of all of your AWS resources. Like my security group has port 22 open to the world. And then if I change it, then it'll record the state change. And then you could see like a timeline of the state for different resources. So that's a config recorder. AWS Config also has another side to it called AWS Config rules. This is where you do like compliance. Like I do not want any S3 buckets in my account to be open to the public. I want all of my RDS databases to be encrypted with KMS, stuff like that. So you could enable AWS Config rules, and then when there's like a compliance change, someone creates a bucket that's open to the public, you're going to have a compliance change, which will be picked up by CloudTrail, and then CloudWatch, not CloudWatch logs, but CloudWatch events. You could filter on these CloudTrail events, and then you could alert yourself, and then forward the alert or forward the event to the security team as well. And anyway, so this is my take on how it works. It might actually work differently than what I think, but this is helpful to me at least. if you watch the YouTube videos on Control Tower, this is what this is the slide that they give you, which has similar elements, but they sort of gloss over a lot of the details. And guardrails. So one thing about Control Tower that it keeps referring to is the concept of guardrails, right? So in security, in some of these security talks at Reinforce, they talk about using guardrails, not gates. So for security, you might be used to, like, I need access to do this. I have to put in a ticket, and then my security team will grant me access or approve my security group, and then I can move on with development. So that's sort of like having gates. So AWS is sort of encouraging the concept of guardrails, where you just let developers do whatever they do. And then if they do something that you don't want them to do, like opening up IAM permissions that are too lax, you actually have these programmatic guardrails that will just stop them in their tracks, or make a note of it, and then you would have a dashboard and you would know that, hey, port 22 is open. So one quote that I came across recently that I kind of liked was joy in security. So like, so say if you're going down a roller coaster, and usually it's pretty fun, but if the roller coaster isn't safe, then what should be fun actually becomes terror, right? So like, the same goes with development. If when you're developing, it's a lot of fun, and then if you don't have a security team on your back, like telling you what you can and cannot do, like you can move really fast and break things. But there's an element of terror to development when, like, what if your S3 bucket becomes public and you leak PII, and then now you're the next person to be on the news, right? So, so security is actually supposed to make development fun, because you're not, up all night worried whether or not you're going to be the next data breach. So AWS Control Tower, they have a number of guardrails that they create by default. Over on the right, you have preventative guardrails. So these will just stop you in your tracks. So these are implemented using what are called service control policies. Service control policies are part of AWS organizations. What you do is, from your master account, you set these service control policies. Like, for example, here's a good one. Don't allow anyone to tamper with CloudTrail. So you set this rule in place on your master account. You spin up like a developer account. The developer, even as the root of that AWS account, you go into CloudTrail and you try to disable that thing, it will say you have no permissions. It's like, what? I'm root, you can't stop me. It's like, yes, I can stop you. So SCPs are nice because you can create these guardrails for your child accounts. And then there's detection, and that's implemented through AWS Config rules. So that will be sort of like, are all of my S3 buckets encrypted? Are they all private? Are all my RDS, EVS, whatever, encrypted and stuff like that? And yeah, a developer could configure it so that it's not encrypted, but it'll alert you. So you have these two categories, prevention and detection, and also you have mandatory and optional. I don't know why in this Punnett Square there's no optional SCP. Anyway. Okay, so say that you wanted to test at home, like I want to create a Control Tower and then play with it. So this is what the initial setup would look like. You would log into your AWS account, go into Services, Control Tower, and then you just click on Set Up Landing Zone, and then you feed it 2 email addresses. And then you check the box, and you're done. So it's pretty simple, but not really. So there are a couple of rules for setting up Control Tower. The account that you're using to set up Control Tower can never have been associated with AWS organizations in the past. Otherwise, you're going to get a rollback. Also, I think the email domain that you use, so every time you set up an account, you need to supply an email address for the root account. If the domain for that email address has ever been associated with another AWS account, you're going to get a rollback. And also, the log email and the audit email, those two have to be unique, and the domains for those emails have to be a part of the domain that your root account belongs to. So it's kind of complicated. I ran into every single one of these gotchas, and I got like a rollback after an hour, so it took me like 2 days to figure this out. And there's like no documentation on this. A good rule of thumb, just start off with a fresh AWS account, just use a fresh email domain and just use that Gmail, my username plus something at whatever. Okay, so say that you set up your landing zone or control tower and you want to start creating child AWS accounts. So this is what it would look like. Oh shoot, sorry. Oh my gosh, hang on. Okay, so you cannot use an IAM user to spin up a new AWS account. You have to use an SSO user. And you actually have to go in through this specific role, the service catalog and user access. That's the only role where the account factory will show up for. So you go to service catalog, and then it's going to show the account factory product. Click on that. Make sure you're in Northern Virginia, I guess. You click launch product, and then you just fill out the form, the account name. And then you supply a unique email for that account. And this unique email will be essentially the root account for that child AWS account. And then for the OU, I'm just going to use the custom OU that comes with Control Tower. And then you hit next, and then you finish up the wizard. And that's pretty much it. The gotchas are you need to use an SSO account and you need to come in through this role. There's another role which is like service catalog full user access, and it's not you're not going to be able to launch a new account, but you can configure the product using that account. So anyway, the cost is free, sort of. It's free except for the resources that you use, and it's free except for the resources that Control Tower spins up. So Control Tower will spin up a couple of resources. One is Service Catalog, which we just went over. That's $5 right off the bat. And then a lot of your cost is going to come from AWS Config. So there are those mandatory rules, like you can't disable them. I think the config rules are basically like alerting you on whether someone made your log S3 bucket public or something. But I think they're for every account. And so like the more accounts you have, there'll be like additional $2 here, $2 there for additional accounts. So if this is just for your personal account, this is going to run you like $15 a month, even if you do nothing. But for an enterprise organization, like this will save you so much time and money, because like to do all this yourself will probably take like an engineer months to test it out. There are some limitations. So Control Tower is only available in Virginia, Ohio, Oregon, and Ireland. I don't know what that means. But one thing that I did kind of notice, like if you log in as a user with administrative access, you're going to see all the regions. But if you log in with someone with less than administrative access, you're not going to see all the regions, just the ones that Control Tower supports. So I'm not sure what that's all about. Just bear that in mind before you roll this out into production. And that's pretty much it. A little PSA here. So I listened to this one podcast that Dan recommended to me. It's called Give 10 Bad Talks All in a Row and Then Get Fired. So one cool thing that they mentioned in this talk is that everyone has 10 bad talks within them, and you just need to get them out of your system. So like at a low pressure event like AWS Columbia Meetup, there's a great opportunity to give your 10 bad talks here, and then after that, you'll be a great speaker. So if you're interested in speaking, we could have more meetups more often if we have more volunteers. Just contact Dan Rusk if you're interested. Where to go from here? There's a documentation, and I can only find like 3 YouTube videos from the reinforced talks that are related to Control Tower. And then questions. Yes.
When you were talking about the billing all being consolidated, could you get down to the point of saying, okay, the operations is costing me this amount? In other words, subsection it by developer, system operators. Basically, each of these little accounts actually are tied. So you could do a more detailed financial. I'm losing you.
You get a financial breakdown of all the people, like the administrators, the end users, everything like that, and how much adding a new user would cost, and that would go into your monthly costs for AWS or anything like that. Is that about right? So, you got a set cost when you start off, and you add a new user, cost X amount to add, so that goes on the cost, correct?
I think so. Anyone who's done billing before?
It's not really by user, although if you're tagging your resources, you can sort of back into it. So, but that's not really an account construct, it's just at a user level. If the EZ2 instance I'm spinning up is tagged with my name, then you can easily peel that out. It's not going to show up on your invoice, but you can peel it out from the data and cost explorer. At the account level, though, your invoice, if you have multiple accounts, all your costs are broken down and stuck into each one of the accounts on your invoice. So if you have 2 accounts or 100 accounts,
it's going to be into that.
So
it's
that's
kind
one
of two different things.
That's one of the benefits of with the per developer account, is since that you sort of take advantage of that and you get per account billing, which easily corresponds to per developer billing.
With organizations, actually, you can filter by each account. So if you go to your bill for the last month, you'll see a general overview, and then you can go through each account. And then you have, if you want to go down to a sub-level, you have to enable cost allocation tags. And that will be tied more to a project, and you can actually see the resources that are tied to this project. And you can get a general overview of how much this project or this developer is costing. So
There's a great talk that Amazon does, not AWS, but how Amazon actually manages accounts. And they've gone from this big monolithic account with all their production stuff in the monolithic account to service teams. So every service team has their own account. So if you build a service, then you're responsible for everything that goes on inside that account, and as well as your production deployments regionally. So if you're deploying, pick an AWS service, you're deploying Frankfurt and US East and that kind of thing, then that team, the team is actually deploying it from their set of accounts, and they're doing it globally through that one place. So it goes somewhat to this Control Tower talk. Once you have that account sprawl, I mean, it can be maddening if you don't have it really well automated, and Control Tower starts to help bring that in.
The other thing I was going to say was the second talk, the one about the launch pad. That's a really good talk. I watched it yesterday.
Oh.
So it actually, the first one actually was more of a general, I think that's where you got your slide from. It's noisy in that, and it was very high level, but that second one, the landing zone, he actually goes in and says, this is what you're gonna have, this is the best practices for it, and he literally goes and walks you through it. So that's the one that I would want. I didn't see the third one, so that second one's well worth it.
I assume you tried this when experimenting with Control Tower, but can you attach Control Tower to an organization sub-account as the root?
No.
So instead of having like a top-level master account, can you make an organization and put Control Tower and use Control Tower at that level and down below?
No,
Can't do
you
it.
can't do that.
Control Tower is a greenfield solution. You cannot brownfield anything. You can't adopt accounts that already exist. You can't use it. So
do they have any migration strategy?
No, you have to migrate out. We had the discussion with AWS, so we have a different design from the landing zone. We modified it, and when Control Tower came out, and you want to migrate that to Control Tower, it's not possible. You would actually have to migrate out of that account. Control Tower is going to create a new set of accounts for you, and then you have to migrate that in.
So there's no way to like have an existing account and integrate? No. Okay.
So it will be brand new. So for example, if you did the landing zone.
So uptake will be slow.
No.
Well, if you're doing this from out of the gate.
Right, but
it's
most
not
people
bad
aren't,
to
right?
start.
I mean, most people who are AWS developers have been doing this for a while. So the only people who will take advantage of this are people who are brand new to AWS.
Or the future. I mean, they're
In the
on
future, I'm
roadmap
pretty sure they'll
is-
come up with a mechanism.
Right, there's a reason why a lot of people want this, because even though you have the landing zone, and it uses a CloudFormation template that has code pipeline and stack stats, it's hard to maintain. And behind the scenes, there are baselines in the security guardrails, like you said, guard duty, config, SCP, and then some people, there's I think there was there's SSO, I think there was Active Directory as well. People didn't know how to manage that, and so they came out with a Control Tower and just to put everything together and say, here, you have this one place, a bunch of click, and you have the results. So even service catalog is behind a CloudFormation template, which before you have to write and understand that. And certain people have different baselines that they have based on their company, like what do we want to inject and what do we want to have when we roll out the strategy.
Right, but the problem with that is that you can see from its billing perspective and the value gets more and more the larger and larger organization you have, right? So if you take it to a large organization that's a big AWS customer, hey, we got this great product for you, you'll really love it because it'll really help you with your large AWS account management. Oh, sorry, you have to start from scratch.
Yeah, that's
Not going to be very appealing.
That's
We're
the
doing
kicker
that
right there.
So there is an approach.
Can't-
We have our existing accounts under, it's an organizations-based account, we call it Legacy, which has a pile of accounts under it. We had to set up a separate top-level master payer account right next to it, which you have to do some finagling to make that happen. And then all accounts from this point forward will be created under Control Tower. And then as Control Tower matures and is able to actually suck in or allow you to migrate other accounts, can't today, but they hinted at that's a future capability, then we'll worry about that later. But the advantages outweigh the pain because all of the invoice data is still going to roll up through both accounts to a single invoice.
Well, how's that gonna work?
That's
So-
not a problem.
I think the
Right,
problem, go ahead.
So that's not going to work because, right, if Control Tower has to be its own top-level account, it's going to generate its own top-level bill.
No.
No, so with Control Tower itself is not the main thing. It's organizations. So Control Tower is just a way to manage organizations. When you create organizations, you have a root account, and then you have some
Right.
accounts just like Active Directory.
So by my previous question, the Control Tower has to be the root of a brand-new account.
Right, because of the way
It can't have consolidated billing with anybody else.
It can't, because
Right,
of the way
so it's going to
manages.
generate its own bill.
So it generates its own bill.
So to have my second account, which has all my existing legacy resources, it's going to generate its own bill, and they're not going to be tied together in any way.
Oh,
It
no.
depends on how you're invoiced. If you're going to invoice on a credit card, that may be the case. If you have that invoicing set up with AWS, that's not the case. You'll get a single bill.
So I'm not sure with Control Tower, but if you had organizations, you can invite an existing account. So if you, like in your case, I can just go invite it in, and now I'm responsible for paying, just like consolidated bill prior. I'm assuming because of the baselines that are involved with Control Tower, AWS is not going to roll that out yet, where you can invite existing accounts, because once you bring it in, you have to bring it in compliance, right? And so I think that's what you're hinting. Later in the future, they'll find a way to do that. Because supposing what you have is not in compliance with what Control Tower has, because it has a VPC, it has a bunch of controls in there. And if you bring yours is not in compliance, do you wipe it away? Or how do you bring it into compliance with Control Tower? And that's where I think they're working on.
So,
Sorry.
Not related to billing, so if you're not done with that discussion, go ahead and finish. Okay, my question is related to these guardrails that you're adding. When you have Control Tower and you add a new guardrail, is there a mechanism today that goes through and tests to see if by adding this guardrail, things are gonna start breaking?
that's a good question.
Or do you add the guardrail and then you wait for people to come and say, my stuff's broken, why did you break it? And how is that communicated back to either the developer who's doing it, or I guess would have to show up in CloudTrail logs or something that indicates this feature, this S3 bucket or whatever that was compliant is now no longer compliant because of a new rule that's been applied to Kite. Does anybody know?
I think it's both. So one, if you did something like, for example, so there are SCPs. SCPs go from the top level all the way down. And there are ways to, it's more you can make it as restrictive as possible. If you go in and say, we don't want public buckets in your SCP, or you want all data going to S3 buckets encrypted, once you put it at the SCP level, it's going to cascade down. And so the developer will say, hey, last week I was able to push data into the S3 bucket, and it was public, but I mean, without encryption, and now I can't. And so now you have to manage, so that trigger means that it has to come from the developer. You won't get an error from the SCP itself, but you're going to get a user error because you've changed something. Now, as far as the mechanism of how it pushes stuff down to the other sub-accounts, is just showing the slide, there is something called CloudFormation stock sets. That's one of the mechanisms, and I tried to reverse engineer the landing zone. There is also a code pipeline that they use to push out stuff to sub-accounts. So one of those you would get an error if it's not done properly, but the other one is now it's more of a compliance change. And that's something you have to inform people, or they're just going to give you feedback and say, hey, we need an exception. This account needs to have access to the public. And so then you have to adjust your SCP, and you probably will have two. Be less restrictive here, and I think more restrictive. There's a way you have to adjust that.
I guess like any other configuration management, you shouldn't be making willy-nilly changes if you don't know what the impact was gonna be.
Right.
So
If
the idea is you
you're-
should be experimenting, like I wonder what happens if I apply this guardrail.
Right,
You should know.
or the security officer comes and says, you have to apply this and you have to do it now because we're out of compliance. Well, you could do that.
Sure.
And then realize that, oh, you broke like half of your client.
So
I see that
I view my career as a series of scenes of movie. And this scene you're describing is the scene in Ghostbusters when the guy from the EPA shows up.
Oh.
And he says, shut it all down.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that happens in your career, and some guy is gonna show up with the authorities and start shouting, shut it all down. You say, like, I have no idea what's gonna happen. And he says, I don't care, you have to shut it down, right? If your security officer does that, well, that's what's gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not,
Don't do that.
yeah, don't do that, right? If you're really serious, like, we don't want any public S3
But-
buckets.
but-
That's a total
Then you shouldn't have
blindsided.
any
You're
public
getting
S3
totally
buckets.
blindsided by this guy coming in, oh, we're out of compliant, and all of a sudden,
But to the question,
Why didn't you tell me now?
it doesn't sound like we know, or it's not obvious that there's a way for these what do you call SCPs to say, I want to apply this. Tell me what would happen.
Yeah, but in a regular single account, you're still going to have that same issue, right? You're still going to have, I mean, some of your changes, you know, that's a policy, it's not a.
I mean, I agree what you're saying is just not good.
If I
What would
do
happen?
this-
What would happen if I apply
Or
this
at least
guardrail?
tell
Would
me
be nice to
where
have a
it'll
report
affect.
Okay,
What if scenario?
so actually you could test that, right? So you will have to go to, IAM, there is a policy where you can actually test and say, hey, here are all the permissions for S3. If I run it, you're gonna get an error saying that this error can't, this permission denied from the SCP. So there's a way to test your IAM policies. So basically, so if you make a change up top, and then you go to each individual account, I just did that today. There is a IAM, basically you take the role or whatever you want and just say, hey, let me just test what's gonna happen, and you get a bunch of services. Once you simulator, thank you. And you run that, you're going to get a bunch of errors, and it'll tell you that it's not a, the typical IAM, it's from the SCP. And so you can see what's going on. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's good. I've never enabled additional guardrails because, like, I've actually tried. Like, I was trying to figure out, like, can I create a new guardrail? I couldn't figure out how to do that, and I think they have like these CloudFormation stack sets that deploy. So I don't know if you can create a new guardrail. I've never seen any documentation on that, but I vaguely remember in one of the YouTube reinforced videos, they said something like, have like a production control tower and like a dev control tower, and then you would like.
Whatever happened to the test control tower?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you have a test bed, and you're gonna test these theories out in that, and then you implement these policies or these guardrails. And if it's an adverse effect, of course, you probably should move forward and put them in. My question is, if you implement a guardrail, how easy would it be to back it out if you didn't?
Oh,
Should
it's
be
easy,
one-
it's easy.
One location.
You just go and just disable. Well, I don't know about the.
Just go in here and disable it.
I don't know about Control Tower itself, but I know from the from just organization, you go into the policy and you can just disable that and re-enable as you want to. So you can have multiple policies and just say, hey, we don't want this anymore. Just disable, go.
Yeah, as long as it's
In the
optional.
recommendation to have a dev and a production control, did they also talk about how you migrate what you did in dev into production?
No, it was just like a brief mention
Okay.
to like
This
double
is
your
the
infrastructure
introduction
costs.
next.
Yeah.
Next feature. Next.
No, next year is going to be the best practices of.
Last year?
That's a very typical Amazon behavior.
Is that two
Promote from
environments
here
then
to
for
here.
the dev control tower and
Co-add.
production control tower?
Well,
Because
even
you really
here,
can't coexist
Microsoft's
together.
done it.
Yeah, it'd be like doubling your infrastructure.
Post-production.
So you have cross-account
Throw your
access.
code
I'm
into?
surprised they.
You push code from dev to prod.
There's no mirror.
Yeah, you probably have to set up your own cross account
Right.
stuff.
If
I'll
the
throw it
policies
in,
go.
we'll fix it.
Yeah.
CloudFormation reverse. A inspector will give me a CloudFormation template of my.
Do they have any third party?
Yeah, but that's not.
Like, are they competing with some product that's out there or some attempt of a product, and this is like their version of it?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, has anyone used Turbot before?
What?
Turbot? Well, in a lot of these videos, I saw a lot of references to Turbot, and I think they're the product that AWS is Sherlocking with Control Tower, and I think I saw maybe like a reinforced presentation by Turbot is like some advanced like multi-account management, and then at the end it was Turbot, walking you through their interface, and it looked pretty cool. I was thinking, I was actually going to put a link down here on the bottom to Turbot to check it out if Cloud Control Tower doesn't work out. But I haven't used it myself, so I'm not sure. All right, that's enough for us. Oh, one more.
I was wondering if you knew anything about Security Hub, if that was integrated with it.
I've listened to a bunch of Security Hub videos, but I haven't heard anything about Security Hub being integrated with Control Tower.
Well, let me ask a different way. Can you customize your guardrails so that you could add something like Security Hub?
Security
Well,
Hub.
he was trying to do the custom, so that's where you were getting stuck in the first place. So once you figure out how to do that, that's when you can try to add in third party.
So like my
services.
situation, my situation is like my team has already kind of tried to manage a fleet of accounts with a ton of Terraform code. And I would love to rip out a chunk of that code and replace it here, but we have to make sure that we're still compliant with all of our security regulations. And so I'm wondering how much of that stuff can we stick back into Control Tower instead? So like if we could adopt like a security hub service as part of like our management accounts, for example, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for.
I'm not sure. I haven't used Security Hub, but I would imagine you should be able to use Security Hub within Control Tower. Let me see if I'm still logged in.
Should it be like it's a separate service, right? So the way to deploy the service would be one, CloudFormation, or two, which you have cross-account roles that will allow you to push that all the way to all the accounts that you want to. And then you can do things like code pipeline. So I think those are things that are left to your own devices.
Right, it's the automatic subscription kind of thing. I was wondering if it was in there. But you could always throw a CloudFormation stack to to cover the invites.
Right, you could also do that. But I think with stack sets, so that allows you to push out to more accounts simultaneously versus actually going to each and every one. So that it creates there's a cross-account role already created for that specifically.
Okay.
So I'm in one of my child accounts, and I just enabled Security Hub. It's my first time seeing this screen, actually. But
I mean, that could apply to anything that requires subscriptions across accounts or requires like everything to be in the same organization.
oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I was wondering, because when some of those, I watched like 1.5 of the same videos you had linked, and they talk about CloudTrail and CloudWatch logs, but they don't talk about anything else that might be useful for security or anything else that you might want to monitor, right? So that's the kind of thing I'm wondering, like, they separate sort of their management accounts from their everything else accounts, and what's in those sort of management accounts felt like it was very fixed, and everything over here felt like it was very configurable. So I was wondering how configurable both sides were.
Oh, I see. So like you're talking about the accounts inside the core OU, like
Yes,
how
yes.
tightly are they locked down?
Yes.
So so if you enable Security Hub, you'd probably do it in the audit account because no one should be going in log archive. Let me see if I could enable Security Hub here just to see. I don't know. No errors so far, but
No errors.
it's something you could play along with. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer.
That's cool.
With something like this, if you're doing that, which one is going to be the master account? So for example, like guard duty, there's a designated master account for guard duty and where all this goes. And there is actually a Python code that will go and actually, you give it a list of accounts. It'll go and actually deploy it there and accept it. And you can probably use that model for Secure Hub. But I'm not sure, I know it's a new service, but there has to be a master account where you can look and see for all the accounts. And if you're going to deploy it, I don't know how it's going to go and propagate all the logs and everything together. So that's the other issue. So for example, with CloudTrail, you have a central log account goes in there. Then you have with guard duty, and then you have with config is also an account where you can also enable config from a master account that propagates down. So each one of them, there should be a way where you have member accounts and one is a controlling account. So it wouldn't just be secure all over the place, because that would mean every time, if you have 20 accounts, 30 accounts, you have to go individually into them. That doesn't really work.
Right. So I was just wondering what the limits of the services was in the core of you. But it seems like it's configurable if you can just enable stuff.
One way, if you don't want to use the control tower, is I would suggest you take the CloudFormation template for the landing zone. What will happen is you'll put in some information, but there's a check that doesn't allow it to actually deploy it. So what it would do is it will put the information into an S3 bucket. In that S3 bucket is a zip file that has the CloudFormation template that builds out all the services and the parameters. And you can see the ones for the code pipeline, you can see the one for guard duty, you can reverse engineer that to help you
Yeah.
out.
So yeah, custom landing zones are clearly the kind of thing my team would be after, but the nice thing about Control Tower was the idea that you could use APIs to get reports out of it of like what the status was of your account fleet. I don't even know if that's possible. Like, are there APIs enough that you could query and say, oh, you've deployed 200 accounts and across these OUs?
I've been looking for APIs for Control Tower and I could not find them. If there are, I would love to know.
Okay,
Don't exist yet.
okay.
Well, they do.
They do, but they're not.
Exposed to us.
Yes, fine.
Was there one last question? I see somewhere. Okay, that's enough roasting for me. Thank you for answering all the questions that were directed at me.